I'm Michelle Jasmine, Amy's publicist, and setting this off. Amy's publicist here at Random House, stepping in for Kate Medina, who is Amy's esteemed editor, who could not be here today. First, I just wanted to say thank you to all the librarians gathered here today. I myself have always been a lover of libraries. I grew up here in NYC, going to the St. Agnes branch on the Upper West Side, and spending, is this,
Sorry.
Sorry.
I'm just gonna, if we turn it down a little, I'll show it better. Try again, how's that?
Good? All right. Spending my elementary school lunch breaks as a library elf at PS 199. It's there that I fell in love with reading, and a bit later in life that I fell in love with Amy Bloom's writing. When I read Away, her NBCC award-winning book, I hadn't even begun to work at Random House, and then a few years later, I had the great privilege with working Amy on her best-selling book, Lucky Us. About Amy Bloom, the Washington Post has said, Amy Bloom knows the urgency of love. When Eleanor Roosevelt's letters to Lorena Hickok came out, there were lots of protestations. They were just friends. That's the way women wrote to one another back then. How dare we say a beloved figure like Eleanor Roosevelt could possibly be interested in women and have an affair behind FDR's back, even though he too was having them. For me, White Houses is a story about two truly remarkable women living in the shadow of, and sometimes physically in, the White House. Amy found this out going through their nearly 3,000 letters that were up at Hyde Park. As she says so eloquently, the story lifted and broke her heart. But at the end, even though love comes in many guises, as Camille, you said before, love is love. I am so glad that Amy's with us today to talk to you about White Houses.
You people are my favorite audience ever. I learned how to read in a library because my dad, although what he said is, I have a haircut every Saturday since he was bald from the time I was born. I think what he meant was I have a poker game every Saturday. And so he would drop me off at the library with my little red wagon so I could accumulate a lot of books. And I learned to say at a very early age, my name is Amy Bloom, my telephone number is 487-3525, and my father will be back soon. And I would spend about 4 hours every Saturday in the library. So I really did learn how to read there. They had a children's section, but I was a very lucky person, and the librarians were people who let me read anything, anywhere. I will say my favorite encounter with a librarian ever was as I was in the stacks working my way from A to Z, and I had only just gotten started, and I was reading on the floor. You also have to picture me basically just looking like a shorter, rounder version of myself with gigantic black curls and pink Harlequin glasses. So you know what that child looked like. And they were very nice to me, I think, on account of the cat's eye glasses. And I was reading this book, and I realized that the librarian was standing sort of eye to toe with me. And she said, and that was in the day, it's not like you all, that's in the day when librarians look like librarians, you know? She had like 2 pairs of reading glasses and a bust like a couch, you know, and sort of a flowered silk thing. And energetic shoes, which I still remember because I was always lying on the floor, and we were always eye to toe. And she said, "What's that? You have that there, dear?" And I said, "I know what I want to be when I grow up." And she said, "What's that?" I said, "Well, it's right here in this book. The girls have outfits, and there is marabou," and I had to run down the 4 flights of stairs to the dictionary to look up what marabou was because we didn't have a lot of that in my house. And I would run back up, and I said, "And they wore those with their peignoir sets." Down to the dictionary, back up to the 4th floor, and she said, "Do they? And what happens next?" I said, they're friends and they sit around, and then like at the end of the day, some of the boyfriends come over. And she said, and what do you think happens then? And I said, I think they play canasta. And she said, well, you must take it home and show your mother. And so that was like my first full-length adult book, which was called A House Is Not a Home, Memoirs of a New York Madam by Polly Adler. And to her great credit, my mother said, I think they do play canasta. I could not have written the last 3 novels without librarians and without libraries, because I wouldn't have known where to start. And when I teach and students say, oh yeah, I Googled it, which is, I always say, that's fine for a first step, because that's not where the depth of understanding comes from. And I had, in my last novel, been doing a lot of research about the 30s and the 40s, and had read Blanche Cook's extraordinary biography of Eleanor Roosevelt, especially the first 2 volumes, which just are brilliantly researched and brilliantly written. And she raises the question. She doesn't really raise the question. She points out the obvious, is really more like it. I was just being delicate. She says, here are the letters. Here are some excerpts from the letters. And when that book came out, she was just excoriated by other historians for suggesting that these were anything other than the Victorian letters of one lady to another lady. I would suggest that Eleanor Roosevelt was not, in fact, a Victorian. She was enormously progressive. Also, not for nothing, she went to an English boarding school. And it was, as she says, the greatest 4 years of her life, as were the 3 months she spent traveling with the headmistress of the school, who was a sort of famous, wonderfully sophisticated French lesbian. So the idea that all of this was brand new to Eleanor Roosevelt, and that somehow she had grown up in such a Victorian household that she wouldn't have known a lesbian if somebody had knocked her over, seemed unlikely. And also, all of her friends were gay couples. These were all the people that she had surrounded herself with when she had her little apartment on Washington Square. So I went to Hyde Park, and I read the letters, and it was a great pleasure for a lot of reasons. My kids always say I only have 4 subjects, which honestly seems to me like a lot. But they say love, death, family, and sex, which I think is probably, I feel like that's plenty. And, but the center of it is always love for me. It is, whether it's love between parents or love between friends, love that doesn't work out, which is one of the things that put me off writing this book for a long time. I thought, I can't bear it. It's too sad. I can't stay with this book long enough. And then the more I read the letters, which were also, by the way, not only beautifully written by 2 women who were very literate, but beautifully written because it was the day when people had penmanship. And so they were really a joy to look at. And Lorena Hickok, who was the foremost female journalist in America at the time that she met Eleanor Roosevelt. She was the first woman to have a byline in the New York Times. Donated her papers at the request of the Roosevelt Library and said that they could not be opened for 10 years. And so after her death. So when they were opened, there was all this sort of back and forth. And one of the things that gave me a lot of pleasure, because every once in a while, the wheel turns the way you would like, and the arc of justice bends as it should. All of those historians who publicly condemned Blanche Cook, within 5 years, all contacted her and said, I'm so sorry, I read the letters. So I read the letters. And I have female friends that I love very much, but I have never said to any of them or written to them, darling, I felt terrible when you called me at the WH because little Jimmy was standing right next to me, and so I couldn't say, je t'aime et je t'adore, as I always do when we say goodnight. See, I've never had the experience of saying that to a female friend. I have never said to a female friend, I long only to hold you and kiss you on the southeast corner of your lips and your beautiful face. So I felt that I had not discovered something, because these letters had been discovered, but in reading them, got a glimpse into this life that they had had, the 12 years that they had spent with Lorena living in the White House. Her room, and these are the parts that were the facts, that were such a great garden of information to walk through to make the story. Her bedroom adjoined Eleanor's. They had a connecting door. Her bedroom was essentially what had been Eleanor's dressing room. And the White House at that time was not, well, it was certainly not as it is now, but it was not even, I feel comfortable saying that, but not even as it had been more commonly seen. It was like a boarding house. They had everybody. They had people from the cabinet. One guy's wife died. He moved in with his little girl because he didn't know what to do, so they lived there. Missy LeHand, who was Franklin's secretary and mistress for many, many years, lived there on the 3rd floor. And in one of those stories that is moving and interesting to me as a writer, the person who ends up taking care of Missy LeHand after she has a stroke and is no longer part of the intimate circle are actually Eleanor and Lorena, who go up to visit her on the 3rd floor. The sadness in this book for me is that they do not, this is spoiler alert, they do not run off together to Provincetown and live happily ever after, opening a little art gallery on Commercial Street. But they love each other their whole lives. And they are, as they both say, not always together as a couple, but always together. And for me, this idea of love that changes, this idea of a love story, it's a great love story in history that was just literally snipped out. The White House would do a lot of photographs, as one does in the White House. And Lorena is always right next to Eleanor, and so they would just cut her out. They didn't have Photoshop. And I thought, what is it like to look at a photo album of your life and see that you are not in the pictures, and that the stories you have written are not published, and that the songs that you sang, they both really liked to sing, they were both great Cole Porter fans, are not, nobody can hear them. And I wanted to bring that story back into our American history. And I was also so moved by the idea of this love that is found. They are middle-aged women when they meet. They're in their 40s. They are not girls. And they are both surprised. They are surprised to be so drawn to each other. They are surprised to find themselves so committed to their love for each other that even when they are separated, and even when they fall apart as a couple, they eventually find their way back to their love. And I think, for me, the facts, because lots of people have said to me, oh, but is that really true? Well, you know, I wasn't there. I can't say it was really true, but their own letters provide so much information and so much intensity of feeling. And when I said that there were 3,000 letters, I should add that Lorena burned several hundred that she felt were too revealing, and that she preferred, in her wish, as she always did, to protect Eleanor. She got rid of those before she donated them. But from the facts, which is why I love being in the stacks, you get the story and you find your way to the truth, and from the truth, as a writer, I get to invent while still keeping my hands on what I see to be true. And that's what I did with White Houses. Thank you.